rather than taking the steps we need to make sure everybody's schedule's balanced and we avoid injuries.
Right. Except for situations outside of our control, that's not the case.
Okay. So my questions to Chief Jefferson would be similar.
Chief Jefferson, do you remember the questions?
Bob Jefferson, Fire Chief. As a previous chief got up here one night and said ditto, I hate to, as Chief Mamone said, but no, basically what Chief Ryan said is very similar to us. Our overtime spread out over the course of the year, much heavier in the summertime during vacation periods. We're running, again, about $100,000 over our overtime budget this year, but we've had almost 9 vacancies for most of this fiscal year. So
Okay.
We did just hire 5 recruits this spring, and we're looking at hiring some more in the fall. So our people are not taxed. We don't have a lot of overtime. There may be an overtime shift or 2 a day, and then other days there's nothing. And with 50 firefighters, you spread that out. Some are taking, 1 a week. Some are taking 1 a year. So there's no tax in there.
Okay. And you think the hiring will smooth this out, and that hiring is covered in this budget, the
Correct.
filling of
Well,
those vacancies?
yes. Whatever is in our budget, we're looking to fill those vacancies that we have. We anticipate some more retirements. And it's as Chief Ryan's explained in the past, once you get into that process, it's almost a year for a hiring process. So once you have the vacancy, and then you start to call for a list and go through interviews and physical agility tests and physicals and psychologicals and all that, and then get into an academy, you're looking a year before they're on the street. So we're moving along in a process of putting a few on at a time and hopefully to fill those vacancies. I anticipate a reduced overtime this summer from what we had last summer because we will have more bodies in the station.
Okay. One of the great pleasures of being on the Board of Selectmen was being introduced to the new recruits as they came on staff. So I'm sure the board's looking forward to meeting your new officers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jameson?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. While not speaking for an increase in animal control officer hours, I would note that we have many animals in this town beyond dogs. On my yard, or from my yard, I've seen deer, possums, squirrels, birds, dogs and cats, neighbors, woodchucks, skunks, chickens are on the east side of town, and turkeys. We also, I believe, have foxes and coyotes, so that the animal, and he sometimes helps people get a bird that's stuck in their house or an animal that's stuck in their house, as I understand it. So I think this is a very valuable position, and I'm sure that Chief Ryan is managing his hours and his deployment of his skills appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Friedman?
Beth Ann Friedman, Precinct 15. I just have a question about the custodian position that's added to the police budget for this year. I was just wondering, seems like you would probably have someone filling that function previous years, and I wanted to know what budget, what budget that activity's been taken out of and put in the police budget.
Chief, is this a new position or is it swap?
Frederick Ryan, Chief of Police. We have been contracting services, cleaning services only, and working with Mr. Chapdelaine. The Capital Planning Committee is investing in a multi-year, multi-phase renovation of the community safety building, and we take our responsibility to maintain the building far more seriously than, frankly, we have in the past. So we intend to hire a building custodian to. It's the only building in town that I'm aware of that doesn't have a custodian, and we're open 24/7. So we're adding that position. Thank you.
Mr. Schlickman?
Precinct 9. I was interested in the discussion about the animal control officer, in that it would be nice to have an additional part-time animal control officer, but in budgeting we're looking to maintain a 3.5%. Moving down the line items to the parking control officers, 3 part-time, There seems to be the usual plethora of illegally parked cars and white box trucks conveniently located near Quebrada without tickets. It's on Google Maps too. It's a constant. But the question is are we limiting the number of parking control officers under this 3.5% formula? Because it only seems that if you do the math and apply parking control officers to illegally parked cars, you would generate more revenue than you're expending for the parking control officer.
Chief, have you done a study whether on that issue, or what's your opinion?
Fred O'Brien, Chief of Police, I don't eat chocolate croissants, so I haven't had that experience. We issue between 15 and 20,000 parking tickets annually. And we have looked at the deployment of we have one full-time, I think it's 2.3 full-time equivalents, is it not?
The budget says 3 part-time, if my read of the budget is correct.
I think it's about 2.5 FTEs. And we've looked at their deployment in the business areas of town, and in my opinion, a fourth would be, we would be looking for work for them to do. They work daytime hours, one works on Saturdays. We try to juggle another one into afternoons. But clearly with the parking study, which I think has been funded, has it not? Approved? We will look at that again in the future.
We're not holding that back on that 3.5% rule, are we?
The entire budget is built on that policy of the town manager and board of selectmen, yes.
Could I, through you, Mr. Moderator, inquire to the manager whether he's holding parking control agents who generate revenue to a 3.5% increase due to the 3.5 rule?
Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. Every single town department is looked in total and held to the 3.5% increase rule, so yes.
Does that offset to the revenues those employees generate?
No, those revenues are treated as general fund receipts along with all other local receipts as revenue here, and the 3.5% growth in the budget is treated separately from revenues.
Well, we've got a boatload of illegally parked vehicles in this municipality, and which would generate revenue for the town, and to not do something about all these illegally parked vehicles and to not employ our sworn officers who have a higher function to do these parking functions, it would make sense to not apply this 3.5% rule to the parking control officers and employ enough so that we can reduce the number of illegally parked vehicles. In case we haven't noticed, this has become quite a destination in the evening, and that's resulted in far worse parking problems after 5 p.m. than you generally find at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Mr. Tremblay?
Ed Tremblay, Precinct 19. Mr. Moderator, I'm curious if when the town is doing a parking study, if they're also going to study the amount of sales that might be lost at Burlington Mall if we start ticketing real hard anybody who pops into a store for a few minutes.
Is that going to be part of your consideration, Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. Certainly any and all impacts on business and residents will be taken into account when we study parking.
Anyone else wish to speak to community safety? Seeing none, we move on to inspections. Who put a hold on inspections? Mr. Loretti.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Chris Loretti, Precinct 7. Mr. Moderator, I have a question about the $40,000 budgeted in fiscal 2013 for SIMS inspections. And I'm wondering, is that amount expected to continue into 2014 as well?
Mr. Chapdelaine?
Currently, currently, right now, that would be a one-time appropriation to cover the costs of inspecting the project as it goes forward. We will keep an eye as the project moves forward, but I don't anticipate that we would be asking for that appropriation again next year.
Thank you. My other question, Mr. Moderator, is whether there was any special amount budgeted in the Inspectional Services Department for the Brigham's development, which is roughly two-thirds the size of Sims.
Mr. Chapdelaine?
Adam Chapdelaine, Town Manager. My understanding is the Brigham's project was approximately one-third the size of the Sims project, and the Inspectional Service Division was able to handle that workload within the confines of its current appropriation, but with the increased scope of the Sims project, to be conservative and to be sure that we were covering all costs, we are requesting this the $40,000 amount you're referencing for the Sims project.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Moderator, I'm wondering if anyone remembers when the Legacy apartment complex was built, which is also roughly two-thirds the size of Sims, whether any additional inspectors were hired.
Does anyone remember back that far? Mr. Burns? Mr. Burns, wrong guy.
Inspectional Services. Mr. Ray, no, I do not remember additional inspectors at that time, but I don't believe we also even had the activity that we have presently in the department.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to inspections? Seeing none. The next one that held was Budget 20, Education. School Department is going to give us a report. Are you going to speak to it? Yeah, go ahead. Now's your turn. We have to take...
I'm doing the intro. 1 year ago, Kiersey Allison Ampey, Chair, School Committee. 1 year ago, Ms. Starks, then Chair of the School Committee, was up here speaking about the dire cuts that would occur unless there was increased funding for our schools. In June 2011, Arlington's residents chose to make a commitment to our town and to our schools and passed an override. This changed the picture so much for this past school year. We avoided cutting 60 more positions, mostly teachers. Our elementary students are in classes averaging 23 rather than 27. They have gym, art, and music every week. The cluster system was retained in the middle school. Size increases in both middle and high school classes were diminished. At the high school level, graduation requirements were kept at 2009's higher level, and popular electives and foreign languages were retained. Athletic fees were reduced. The FY13 budget that will be presented momentarily by Dr. Bodie and staff marks the second year in 7 in which we have been able to make staff additions instead of reductions. Although not yet near FY10 staffing levels, we are moving in a better direction. She will discuss how these additions impact our students. Arlington schools continue to offer above-average education for below state average spending. We're grateful for the override, which has granted us a period of fiscal stability. It also gives us time to address the knotty issues we see ahead: increasing enrollment, equity of resources, aging infrastructure, teacher and staff contracts to negotiate. These are the issues that the school committee and the schools are preparing to tackle in the coming year. And now, Dr. Bodie, where'd you go? Oh, there she is. Thank you.
Captain Bodie, Superintendent of Schools. Mr. Moderator, town meeting members, I'm very pleased to be here tonight to give you a brief report on the schools and the school budget for next year. I plan to address briefly the following topics: demographics, academic highlights, athletic safety, budget overview, and special education. Since 2000, the annual enrollment growth in the public schools has averaged around 1.75% each year. Since 2005, we have enrolled an additional 400 students, which is equivalent to another elementary school, all amid many years of budget reductions. The question I think that many of you would ask: are we getting good educational value for the tax dollars invested in our schools? I would emphatically say yes, and looking at this through a couple of lenses, one being cost. The per pupil cost in Arlington is about $500 less than the average per pupil cost in the state of Massachusetts. while our students perform at very high levels. As many of you may know from last week, U.S. News & World Report ranks the high schools in the nation. Arlington High School was ranked was number 26 in the state. And for that ranking, received a gold designation from U.S. News & World Report for its high achievement. This places Arlington High School in the top 2% in the nation. As you can see in the budget book that was provided to you on the first day of town meeting, our students are accepted into very competitive colleges, and they continue to excel at very high levels with state MCAS tests and national exams. And a little known fact is that the survival rate between classes is very high in Arlington, usually somewhere 98, 99%. Besides academics, success comes in many forms, in athletics, in the creative arts, and community service. Nearly 60% of our high school students participate in at least one sport, and 3 of our students this year were nationally ranked. In the creative arts, 3 of our art students received national awards and Scholastic Arts Awards, with getting gold and silver keys. 2 of the 4 musical groups that were asked to perform at the state music conference, all-state conference, after hundreds auditioned anonymously, were from Arlington. Our students give of themselves continuously, whether they're in the elementary, they're raising money for Haiti or for food banks, or in the middle school, helping to paint and upgrade tech rooms, high school juniors giving a day for community service. With respect to athletics, one issue that is before you at this town meeting is safety. Arlington High School is focused on protecting our athletes, ranging in policies we implement to impact baseline testing to maintenance provided for all helmets. In addition, we have provided extra money in our budget this year for these purposes and for all safety equipment. And there's more information in the book that was provided to you. And for those of you that are watching at home, this budget book can be found on the Arlington Public Schools website in the budget section. Moving on to our budget. The school budget is different than other town budgets because it is not fully funded by town appropriations. In fact, nearly $6 million of the $50.5 million budget comes from grants, fees, and other reimbursements. The graphic we'll see, shows you how what the funding source looks like as a percent of whole. As Dr. Allison Ampe said, we have been very fortunate that the voters in Arlington passed an override last June. The impact of that vote, which we remain very grateful for, is that this year we did not have to have any budget reductions, and the same will be true for next year. But the FY13 budget is also been formed in the context of all the years that we have had budget reductions. And there's been efforts in this budget to partially rebuild areas that have been hardest hit, one of which is the administrative infrastructure of the school system. Another consideration has been the relocation of Thompson students, both in terms of staffing and space, as well as our continued investment in our special education programs. And then this also is a labor negotiation year. In this graphic, it demonstrates budget expenses by category. The one thing that I would call your attention to is the part of the pie that is for central office. In that particular budget is all of the money set aside for negotiations as well as steps and lanes. And when negotiations conclude, those monies will be redistributed to other parts of the budget. Now I want to talk a little bit about some trends and costs in special education. As I know that all of you are aware, all public schools, by law, must provide a free and appropriate education in the least restrictive environment. Special education is more expensive than regular education because of lower student-teacher ratios and the other related services that are necessary for many students. In the Arlington Public Schools, 15% of our students receive special education services, 13% in in-district programs, and 2% in out-of-district programs, whereas the state average is at 17%. One of the notable trends in special education in the district has been that since 2005, the number of students receiving special education services has decreased by 9%, while enrollment has increased by 9%. And the question is, well, why is that the case? One of the main reasons that this is the case is our second-to-none reading response to intervention program. In this program, our students are monitored, all of our students in K-5 are monitored for reading level and provided with the extra services that they would need to become proficient readers. 88% of our students are at grade level in grade 3 and 95% by grade 5. Here is a graphic that gives you an illustration of the trends in special education. I call your attention to the yellow, which you can see at the top shows a decrease in out-of-district placements since 2005, and also the shrinking of special education as a percent of total population. The teachers in our district work very hard to meet all the needs of our students, and I think that the reason why you're seeing this is a result of a compilation of many of the interventions that we do in regular education. Yet the cost of special education does grow at about 8% every year. This is better than it had been. We previously had been growing at about 10% every year. It costs between $22,000 to $32,000 more to educate a student out of district than in district. If all of our students that were in our substantially separate programming were to be placed in out-of-district programs, it would cost the district $2.3 million more than it costs to educate them in district. It is also the right thing to educate our students as best as possible within our community. This is preferable for the students as well as their families. In this next graphic, you can see how the out-of-district ratio looks to in-district for all of our special education programs. It's basically a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of costs. By the way, a copy of this PowerPoint is at the back because I know that I'm rushing through it a little bit. There are many metrics that demonstrate